Everybody go ahead and introduce yourself and then keep your eye line there.
All right. I'm Katie Scherr. I teach 3rd grade at Collin Ranch Elementary School, and today's lesson was in math. We were partitioning shapes into equal pieces and then using some real-world application in having the students determine some pieces with fractions where we've partitioned for a while already in the past, and now what we are doing is taking that information and starting to see that there's some equivalent fractions when we partition our shapes as well.
Turn your body up a little. Mix that. Okay. Okay. So then, you ready for question 1?
Go for it.
Okay. We want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge, what was taught before the lesson, and what will come after it?
Okay. So today's lesson was, we're about 2 weeks into students understanding fractions. And for our 3rd graders coming in with Common Core, they haven't really had a lot of experience with fractions other than partitioning shapes that they've done in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. And so at the beginning of this unit of fractions, we really took a lot of realia and taking it, folding it into halves, into thirds, really introducing the vocabulary of what those mean. In 3rd grade, our biggest piece with fractions is to know, for students to know the half, the fourth, the third, the eighth, and the sixth. And that's really our only focus. But it's amazing when you start to think about what students need to know in those pieces, what they would need what knowledge they would have to have in order to build up to that. So we spent a good week just really folding different shapes in different sizes and having conversations about that. Students really struggled with partitioning shapes to equal sizes in the beginning, and we really did have some thorough discussions of why the pieces need to be equal in order for them to be counted as fractional parts. Today's lesson, we're moving it one step further, where we're able to really take a look at the fraction and start to decompose it, or look at a whole number and start to decompose it. Unfortunately, in the lesson, we ran out of time, so you really didn't get to see the piece of the lesson where they were going to be taking a picture of a shape. It might have been a shape that was divided into 8 pieces, and 3 of those pieces were shaded. The students were then going to take the number bond and decompose that whole number into 3/8, and then the other side of the bond would have been 5/8. And so thinking about what the students need to know to have that, it's just slowly, progressively taking them through the steps of one piece at a time and having that conceptual understanding of folding the shapes, then shading shapes and being able to write a fraction to those shaded pieces, and now really taking a whole number, decomposing it, and seeing how that relates back to the picture. And then the third part of what they were going to be doing was drawing another representation of that 3/8. So if it had showed it in a rectangle, the students may have drawn it in a circle, or they may have partitioned the shape a little different than what it was in the rectangle, in the original rectangle that was given. So as we move forward, we're going to continue with the decomposing of numbers, and that should blend right into the conversation with the equivalent fractions, as well as with being able to compare fractions.
Talk about the standards or cluster targeted in the lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard or cluster?
Thinking about the standard that I was teaching today, it really was the first piece of the numbers and fractions, where it's talking about students being able to equally divide pieces and know that there's one part that can be a unit fraction and another piece that makes up the whole. So if you had thirds, you had 1/3 and you would have 2/3, that the students would really understand that the 1/3 and the 2/3 together make up a whole. Again, the lesson is just one piece of the puzzle of where we've been going. The last 2 weeks we've been focusing just on this one particular standard, because it is, if they don't have the understanding of this particular standard, the others won't make a difference, because you can't. This is the foundation of where they need to be going with this knowledge with fractions.
Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified, and how did you plan for this? You want me to take a little
Just
pause?
give me a second. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified, and how did you plan for this?
The core action indicator that I think was best exemplified in this particular lesson was core action 2. If you look at E, it really is asking if the teacher can informally look at students' work in understanding if they have a grasp of the concept of where you're going with the lesson and where they are in their understanding of the concept of what we're doing. This lesson today was kind of a stop and go, and it really lent itself for me to be able to walk around and see where students were in that learning process. There were quite a few students that still are struggling with the piece of equivalent fractions. Not that we're there yet, but some have already made that connection, where some are very comfortable in saying to the audience or to their classmates in a class discussion, I don't understand this. And I've done a lot of modeling with that with students, so they know if I don't understand it, I've been a little obnoxious in making sure that even when a student's explaining it, and I do understand it as the adult, I'll play that devil's advocate and say, wait, I'm still not understanding this. Can we come up with a different way to explain this? And you saw that in that first lesson or that first problem when we were picking apart, what I bought with coffee and with cream cheese and bagel, because that one student, even though we explained it 3 different times, when we finally went into that partner group, I could hear him say, I still don't get it. But it was that comfort level of not being able to do that, and that's where the teacher uses those ears to hear that and continue with that. Unfortunately, because we did do that piece of it, we had to cut our lesson shorter than where I wanted to go with it. However, I really did feel that was an important piece to it, and that's why we lingered on it a lot longer than I might have if everybody had understood the concept of where we were.
We're interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into the classroom. Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
Okay, can you give me a second?
Yeah.
A little bit as we go.
Yeah, I know. All right, so we are rolling, and so we're back at, we're interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
The shifts required in Common Core math is one where we're really making sure that we are staying to the standard of what we're trying to teach in our grade level, and is it allowing us to go in depth with what the students are understanding with their knowledge. In that, we do look at rigor. Is what we're doing something that's of quality work, and really asking the students to really think about the math in it. We were really doing that today. There was some application process to what we were doing, as well as some conceptual understanding. And again, you only saw probably the last 15 minutes of the class moving into that conceptual understanding. Sadly, we'll finish that tomorrow, but that won't be something that will be captured on film as we move through. But making sure that what we're doing in the class really is allowing students to be stretched in their thinking and to make those connections that they need to make in math for math to make sense to them, and be able to take that with them in 2 weeks or a month when they're asked to do something very similar to it again.
How did you teach the content of this lesson prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what is different?
When I look at how did we teach fractions before, I consider myself one of those people. I try not to do worksheets. I try not to do a drill and kill, but some of it is that, and looking at a shape and seeing what's shaded, and then looking at the shape and seeing that it's partitioned into 2 pieces, and knowing that one piece is shaded, so that would be 1/2, and giving those students that exposure to it, and then really having the models already drawn for them, as opposed to now I'm really making them draw those shapes. And it was very tough the first week that we did it, because the kids, their accuracy in drawing the shape that didn't look like a rectangle, when they were partitioning the shapes, it was showing that the halves that they made or the thirds that they made were really not truly equal pieces. And so it was hard as a teacher when you would ask them, well, do you think this is you've equally divided these into the pieces you need to? And they would look at you and say yes, and you'd have to say no, they're not. And so again, you'd have to erase and do that. I don't think I would have taken the time to invest in that piece of it with the students and having them make and draw and partition. But what a powerful piece it's been for them, because now they can take a shape and partition it. And we've had many conversations with how you would partition a circle and using the clock, which I learned from another teacher in a training that I had, but really helping the students understand that if they learn a trick with their partitioning or how they see things partitioned, that may help another student in what they can also then apply to what they're trying to do as well when they're struggling with partitioning. The other piece is, I don't think that we really would have gotten so in depth with their understanding or helping them make connections. And I remember the second or third day that we really started doing the folding of the pieces of rectangles and circles and squares, that they weren't really seeing the connection with what I was needing them to see. And I kept thinking in my head, don't tell them, don't tell them. Because if I did tell them, then it ruined that piece of it for them to see that connection. And I think throughout the lesson you did hear when students were explaining some things, you heard a student go, oh, I get it now. And that's really what it's about. I think before it was just more, I have to teach this lesson, I have 60 minutes to teach it, let me get through it. And then at the end, seeing if students got it, and if they didn't, then we'd have to go back and I'd have to reteach something. Where this one, I'm allowing myself permission, if there is something that someone isn't getting right then, that I stop and we take that 20 minutes or 30 minutes to really go through an explanation. Because the more that they hear that class discussion and they're able to talk with each other, the more it stays within their brain of what's really going on with the math.
Student engagement is crucial to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensured that all students had the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. How did the students handle this lesson? Did they understand the mathematics, and how do you know?
One of the challenges, I think, with Common Core is really making sure that we're giving access to all of the rigor that we're asking, and having high standards for every student that comes in, whether or not they have special needs or if they are a gifted and talented student. So it's that happy dance, I think, that teachers play in making sure that students really have that exposure to some very good, rigorous mathematic problems, as well as exploration when we're talking about conceptual understanding. Students did have access to all the problems. I didn't stop, whereas in the past I may have given help a little bit more with students, but I think it's good to have productive struggle with those students in their learning, because it's through that productive struggle that they then gain that self-confidence in where they're going with it. Luckily, because the lesson did run long, they have a night to think about it, and I know that I have a few students that will go back tonight and really think about some of the things we discussed with decomposing numbers as well as the number bond. And they're going to come back tomorrow before we even start the lesson and want to share what they thought about. And I'm hoping that in that thinking, that may then bring along some of those students that we're still not seeing. You know, I very quickly rushed through the number bond of taking the 1 and partitioning it or decomposing it into 2 parts, where it was, and I don't think I have the verbiage correctly, where it was 3 pieces of a unit fraction. And some kids got it right away after they thought about it, and others were just like, I'm confused, I'm done, it's 3 o'clock, I know I get to go home. Whereas tomorrow they know that they can't escape it, and we will revisit that as well. If I do have some students that still are not understanding that, we may need to sit down and do a little bit of small group work to really help them in that focus, and I may have to be more of the leader in that as opposed to them just working with a partner.
Explain how you differentiated in the lesson. Did all students have opportunity to work on grade level content? And let's see. If all students did not have the opportunity, explain why. Was differentiation in the lesson? It was not as much as I had seen in previous lessons that I've taught. What I really wanted to do with the students this go around was, it's a new concept with decomposing numbers, as well as really looking at a new concept called number bonds. And so before this
filming took place, we actually watched, I think it was a Khan Academy video on number bonds, and it was something for kindergartners. But the students really saw in the video that the number bonds were just taking a number and splitting it. So if you took you took a whole number, and if you split them into parts and added those parts together, that would equal the whole number. And so students, when they saw the video, it was making that connection for them. So it was really giving everybody that opportunity to see something at a much lower level that's much more understandable than what I was trying to do with the fractions in decomposing those. So differentiation, not so much with the expectation that not all students were going to do the work that I was asking, but really scaffolding it. So it was building it up from the ground level of what is a number bond, what do we do when we're talking about really decomposing numbers. And we had decomposed the number 10 before this particular lesson that was filmed. And in that, the students were initially just doing two numbers or two parts of the number that could be 10. And then finally one student said, well, can I just use two parts, or can I use more than two parts? And I had said to him, and he was one that struggles a little bit more with those concepts, and I was very excited to see that he had thought of, well, what if I did 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, I think it was 5 times. And I said, I don't know, would that work? And he said it would, because when you decompose those and you add those twos together 5 times, that does equal 10. And so we brought that up in the discussion before the filming. So students really started to grasp that idea that they can get something even if we back it up a little bit and make it more simplistic to what they've had before, because we've been adding numbers probably since kindergarten with the students. And so really giving them that confidence of where it is, but now we're taking it to that next level of where they need to apply the number bonds and the decomposing with fractions.
Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson?
Can you give me a minute?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Wording. And the question is, which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson?
Students best exemplified some particular things in the Core Action 3 when we look at our instructional guide. The first one was the students were really speaking more informally with some of the math that they had, and I was helping them connect those pieces to the true mathematical vocabulary. But I did get tripped up a little bit as well, and the kids know that, and I think that makes it more human when I'm able to go back and say, ooh, I think I misspoke, or I think I said something incorrect. Let me go back and see if I can get it. And then having that vocabulary up there for students, I think has really been a key piece in something that I've added this year, where it makes them see those words that we may have not exposed them to yet with decomposing or number bonds or unit fractions or the halves, the thirds, the fourths, and so forth. And so I think that that's really a piece that I see that I can lead them in a place where they may not have had that connection yet, because we do speak more informally, I think, as a society, and really giving them that vocabulary, the math vocabulary, in order to explain what they had. And as you saw in the video, students really did struggle sometimes. They knew what they were thinking in their head, but they weren't quite sure how to speak that and explain that. And I think we've gotten a whole lot better since the beginning of the year, but we definitely have a long way to go with it. And it's nice to see that in whole class discussions that other students can step up and then speak for that student. And when that student does explain it for the other student, they look at them and go, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I just couldn't think of the words to actually express what I was thinking inside my head.
Great instructors are continuously learning, and we want to understand what you celebrated in this lesson and what you would improve upon. Reflecting on the lesson, what worked particularly well and what might you do differently?
So always in a lesson, I think teachers break apart and reflect on things, and almost sometimes ad nauseum in what we do. I was really excited to see, I wasn't expecting the application problem to come up with where the students, I personally thought that they would just say that I spent 2/6 of my money and we would be done and we would move on to the next piece of the lesson. And immediately many of the students were making the connection that Yes, that 2/6 equals 1/3. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? Let's take this and let's talk about it, because I'm not sure students see that connection, that these two fractions could actually be equal or equivalent. And so we spent a lot of time in that, as you probably are watching from the video. But it again serves the purpose of what we need to celebrate with the lesson, because I could get up there and talk all I want, but that's not really where the learning is going to take place. The learning is going to take place when the students are talking and when they're coming up with their discoveries. And I think one of the hardest pieces as a teacher is to be able to actively be listening to what they're saying, and then think of how because a lot of times when they speak, it doesn't make sense, or it's not making sense to you, but it makes perfect sense to them. And so it's giving yourself permission to say, wait, I don't understand this. Can someone else help explain this? And the more that I've done that with students, the more connections I've seen in how they can think about a problem in 4 or 5 different ways, whereas I might have only seen it in 2 ways. Some of the things that didn't go quite as well, I think that there were some students that were really struggling with some concepts that I may have, it might be an opportunity for me to pull them in a smaller group to really help them understand where we're going. There were quite a few fidgeters in the room and not really understanding. I think there was a student that had his head on the desk and another one that was kind of laid back in his chair, and really looking at, what is it, what's making them not be interested in this? Is it just the problem itself? Is it the time of day? Or is it something that I need to then incorporate within them or instill within them that they can jump in and be a valid part of the discussion of what we're having in the math lesson?
Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors?
Surprises for me and unexpected student behaviors kind of go hand in hand. In a math lesson, you can tend to have a little bit more engagement than you might in a writing lesson or in a reading lesson. And I think that with the students, there were quite a few that chose to play with their rulers or chose to play with their template, pattern block template, that again, I think all teachers struggle with, because when you have a class, you're always going to have a few students that aren't quite where you'd like them to be. Some surprises happened with a few students being able to share some things. I have one student in particular that when we were doing a lesson in the past, I asked him to get up and share with the class, and he just totally stood up there and he goes, I can't say anything to anybody, I'm just too shy. And today he was able to actually share some of his thinking with the class, which I was very proud of him for, because I think that just warrants to say that he's building up that self-confidence in what he has to share mathematically. I think it can be intimidating for some students when you have 5 or 6 students that are always understanding the math and able to explain it and look at patterns and make those connections for other students. And so to see a variety of students step up to that plate today and really be able to share some of their math thinking was definitely a happy surprise for me. Okay. All right.
Good work.
Thank you.